In The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke sensed that his friends were in danger on Bespin, he abandoned his training on Dagobah and ignored the pleas of Yoda and Obi-Wan. Just like his father, Luke let his personal feelings and attachment to his loved ones cloud his judgment, and he could only see himself as a savior coming to their aid. In reality, not only did he endanger them more by arriving on Cloud City since they had to go back and rescue him, he also lost his lightsaber and his hand as he was brutally defeated by Darth Vader. At least in Legends, Luke would later admit that he knew it was a mistake to go to Bespin and that he should have stayed on Dagobah to continue training. So today, I want to explore that possibility. What if Luke kept training with Yoda and never went to Cloud City? Luke knelt on the soft, damp ground in the clearing. It was a humid evening on Dagobah, a stark contrast to the dryness of Tatooine he had grown up in. However, after 3 years of living on the swampy world with Master Yoda, he was accustomed to it. Luke could feel the Force flowing around and through him, and emanating from the countless life forms that populated Dagobah. The planet itself was strong in the Force, and he felt that its power had influenced his training in some ways. After he had a vision of his friends in danger, Obi-Wan and Yoda explained that the future was always uncertain. The will of the Force could not possibly be determined by them, and events were constantly in motion. In order to stop him from leaving, they had revealed information about his father, a rare moment that stressed their desperation to keep him there. Yoda told him that Anakin had premonitions too, of death and suffering, and when he had acted on them, things did not go well. He wouldn't elaborate any further, but Luke's impulsiveness had simmered, and although it pained him to think that his friends could be in danger, he hoped that perhaps his vision had been wrong, or that events could change by some other factors. Obi-Wan had told him that a Jedi Knight could not let their personal feelings cloud their judgment. Although it seemed to go against his instincts, Luke realized that the fight against the Empire and the Sith was too important to risk himself, but it had taken both of his masters to convince him. So he had stayed. After some time, he had been able to boost the power of his X-Wing's transmitter, enough to get a signal through Dagobah's foliage, and he learned what had happened to Han, Leia, and Chewie once he made contact with the rebellion. Han had been captured by a bounty hunter and given to Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine, allegedly frozen in carbonite. Leia and Chewie were prisoners of the Empire, but the Alliance wasn't sure where. When Luke heard that, he had nearly left Dagobah again, plotting a course for Tatooine to get Han and then straight to wherever Leia was. But he knew that he couldn't. He'd probably get himself killed, and the future of the Jedi Order along with him. He had to be patient. He had to trust the Force and be rational. Letting his emotions control his actions was not the way of a Jedi. It was a stepping stone to the dark side. Fear of loss was the shadow of greed, as Yoda would say. Since he knew that his friends were alive, Luke decided that it would be smart to complete his training and rescue them at the first opportunity, but he had to focus on the Emperor and Vader. What would be the point of rescuing them if they would still be rebels hunted by the Empire the second he got them out? Better to do what he was meant to do as a Jedi and help his friends when he was ready. So Luke had trained with Yoda, learning centuries worth of knowledge and technique as the months went by. He learned the histories of the Jedi and Sith, the names of famous Jedi Masters and infamous Dark Lords, and great battles fought between them thousands of years before. He learned the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, becoming an incredible swordsman as he practiced the stances and routines constantly. Eventually, his father's lightsaber felt like an extension of his arm, perfectly balanced in his hands as he moved through slashes and feints. He and Master Yoda would often practice stances together in the mornings. As time went on, Luke continued to hear and see Obi-Wan's spirit. Occasionally, he would tell Luke things about Anakin. Luke was very surprised to learn about the Chosen One prophecy of the Jedi, and how many believed that his father was that savior spoken of, destined to bring balance to the Force. Luke had no idea what true balance in the Force even meant, and Obi-Wan and Yoda only said that the Jedi believed it meant the destruction of the Sith. Obi-Wan told him that he believed Luke inherited all of Anakin's potential in the Force, meaning that he could possibly be the true Chosen One. Luke thought that was a bit ridiculous and had no intention of putting too much of his beliefs in prophecy. The Empire was a real threat, and he had to focus on beating them. As the years went on, Luke's power in the Force grew massively, so much so that Yoda said their power was equal by the 3rd year. Luke thought that was impossible, but Yoda explained that because of Luke's lineage and his natural sensitivity to the Force, his dedicated training with no distractions from the outside allowed him to become an incredibly powerful Jedi at a much faster rate than the Jedi of the past, who were hindered by traditions and ceremonies of the Order. And so finally, Yoda had told him that it was time for his final Jedi trial. Luke was still kneeling patiently when his master hobbled over with his cane and stood before him. "Young Skywalker," Yoda said, "powerful you have become, strong in the Force and in the mind." "Thanks to your teachings, Master," Luke replied with a bow of his head. "Come the time has for your final test. Stand you may," Yoda said, and he took a small step back. Luke stood and clasped his hands behind his back, looking down at the little Jedi Master and waiting for his instructions. After a moment, as if sensing his thoughts, Yoda said, "To Obi-Wan, you listen." Behind him, and over his right shoulder, the shimmering blue form of Obi-Wan Kenobi appeared, the physical manifestation of his consciousness within the living Force. He still looked the same as the day he had died on the Death Star. "Hello, Luke," Obi-Wan said. "To see you standing there on the cusp of becoming a Jedi Knight is something I feared would never come to pass." Luke smiled back at his masters, but said nothing, simply trying to focus and steel himself for whatever trial awaited him. Perhaps sensing his eagerness to begin, Obi-Wan seemed to adopt a more serious tone. "We stand before you now to deliver your final Jedi trial. If you pass, you will be granted the rank of Jedi Knight. But I warn you that this will be the most difficult moment of your entire training," Obi-Wan said, and Yoda nodded sternly. Obi-Wan continued, "We have trained you in the ways of the Force in the hopes of lifting the galaxy out of these dark times imposed by the Empire and the Sith. But before that can happen, you must know the truth of that darkness, and that truth could not be shared with you until you were ready, until you were a Jedi." Luke's brow furrowed slightly, in both confusion and in slight anger. Was there something they had hidden from him? Secrets that had been kept? Why would they lie to him about something? The feelings passed in a moment, washed away by his years of Jedi training. The young farm boy that yelled and whined was long gone. Luke simply kept his face calm and relaxed. Obi-Wan seemed to be watching him, observing his emotions and sensing his thoughts. But then he continued. "At the end of the Clone Wars, Palpatine orchestrated the destruction of the Jedi Order and the creation of the Empire, as you know. But to do so, he first corrupted the one Jedi that we had placed all our faith in. He spent over 10 years manipulating this Jedi with plans to convert him into his Sith apprentice." Obi-Wan's eyes dropped to the ground as he said, "The night that the Jedi Order fell, your father, Anakin, became Darth Vader." No amount of training could have stopped Luke from taking a step backwards and gaping in shock at his two masters. "What?" he gasped. "That's not possible. You told me that my father was the Chosen One, a hero," Luke said, trying to process this earth-shattering revelation. Obi-Wan and Yoda said nothing, both watching him intently. Although it seemed his world was spinning and his heart would beat out of his chest, a part of Luke remembered that this was his Jedi trial. He tried to calm himself, using a Jedi technique several times over, and he stood up straight again. "No emotion there is," Yoda said, reciting a portion of the Jedi code. Luke wasn't sure if it was a reminder or a warning. "Yes, Master," Luke said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. It took all of his training to remain composed. They had kept this from him his entire life. They had been training him to confront his own father, and he didn't even know it. "We never intended to lie to you, Luke," Obi-Wan said, his voice gentle and almost pleading. "My master, Qui-Gon Jinn, spoke to me from the Netherworld and instructed me not to tell you the truth about your father until you were ready. He said that the fate of the galaxy depended on it. Yoda and I knew that we had to wait until you were trained, which is why this is your final trial. Master, do you expect me to kill my own father? Luke asked. Destroyed the Sith must be, Yoda replied. But a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Jedi don't expect to kill their enemies, Obi-Wan said. Confront them, yes. Defeat them, yes. But it's how you do it that defines who you are, what kind of Jedi you are. I don't know what I'll do when I face Vader, Luke said, staring down at the ground. He had idolized the vision of Anakin he had formed in his mind for his entire life, imagining a great and noble man. To learn that that hero had become an evil Sith Lord responsible for horrors under the name of the Empire was almost unbearable. Your mother believed that there was still good within Anakin, Obi-Wan said. There is another thing you must know. Leia is truly your twin sister. To keep you both safe from the Empire, you were separated shortly after you were born. At this, Luke also felt a giant wave of shock, but not born of grief like before. This was full of joy, of a feeling that had long lingered in the back of his mind, but now felt as though it was pulled to the forefront and glowing brightly. He had always felt something profound and confusing with Leia, a connection in the Force, and he didn't even know it. They were siblings, Skywalkers. He had to save her from the Empire. But first, he had to face Vader and the Emperor. The Sith had destroyed the galaxy and corrupted his family. Luke knew what he had to do. He just wasn't quite sure how to do it yet. I understand, Masters, he said. I know what I must do. I trust the Force. Kneel, Padawan, Yoda said. Luke knelt before the small master, who summoned Luke's lightsaber into his outstretched green hands. Yoda ignited the blue blade, holding the oversized saber aloft, and brought it over Luke's shoulder, and then the other. Rise, Jedi Knight, he said. Luke stood with pride as his master smiled at him, and he felt the Force's power within him as finally his training was complete. He was a Jedi, and he would face his destiny. 1 week later, the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. The Sith Lord Darth Vader knelt before his master in the Imperial throne room. His mechanical respirator worked loudly, the sounds echoing off the black walls. I have felt a great disturbance in the Force, my master. Something is wrong, Vader said. The Emperor swiveled in his throne to face his apprentice, and his face was riddled with annoyance. I sense nothing, Lord Vader. Perhaps your emotions have gotten the better of you once again, he spat. We must focus on squashing the last cells of the rebellion. I have pressing matters to attend to, and I will travel to the Death Star shortly. I feel it, Vader insisted, keeping his head bowed. I can feel it at this very moment. He was suddenly interrupted by the communications console on the Emperor's throne beeping in alarm, a very urgent message coming through. Palpatine flicked the button and waited for whomever to speak. My Emperor, we have received word of an intruder on your level, the voice on the other end said. Somehow they seem to have entered the palace from above. Above? Vader questioned, when behind him, the large doors slid open to reveal a figure cloaked in the traditional brown robes of a Jedi Knight. His hood was drawn to hide his face, but Vader turned and felt the man's presence in the Force immediately. The disturbance. It was his son, Luke. The two red-robed Imperial guards that flanked either side of the door tried to spring into action, but Luke waved both hands out to his sides, sending them both crashing into the walls. Both guards fell to the floor, unconscious, and the Emperor let out a loud cackle. Young Skywalker, I presume, he said, almost cheerfully. Luke was not truly concerned with the Emperor's apparent happiness at his appearance. He was more interested in the conflict he sensed within his father. Vader stood between him and the Emperor, but he made no move to draw his lightsaber yet. Luke decided that he would make the first move. Father, he said loudly, throwing the word out at Vader almost like a weapon. Vader's masked face was unreadable, of course, but Luke could feel the explosion of emotion through the Force. "So you know the truth," Vader said flatly, still standing completely still. The Emperor was simply watching them. "I know the truth that you were once Anakin Skywalker, my father. My mother believed that there was good in you until her last breath. I'd like to believe the same," Luke said. "Anakin Skywalker is dead," Vader replied. But even Luke could tell that he didn't speak the words with conviction. There was much conflict in his mind. Luke knew how to get through to him. He gently probed Vader's thoughts, seeking the information that he did not already know. It was truly easy for him. His power greatly eclipsed Vader's already. His father couldn't have shielded his mind if he tried. Luke found what he was looking for. "I know that Palpatine manipulated your fears of losing my mother, of being alone. You remained loyal to him because you thought he was all you had left," Luke said calmly. "You were wrong. You have me, and you have my sister, Leia. We are your family. Come back to us, Father." Vader still didn't move. "A sister?" he said quietly, more to himself than to Luke, it seemed. Luke began to walk towards Vader. "Let go of the dark side, Father," he said. "Leave the Sith behind. I've come here to bring you back. Help me destroy the Emperor." Palpatine laughed again on his throne as Luke drew closer. "Many have tried to convert your father, you foolish boy. Many have failed," he cackled. "The chosen one serves only me." Luke was now face to face with Vader, and he looked up into his father's angled mask. Vader's conflict felt like a tsunami of energy within the Force. "It is too late for me, my son," Vader said, looking away from him. "Enough of this, Skywalker," Palpatine barked, standing from his throne. "Finish it. Kill him and take his place at my side." Luke stepped around Vader to look at the Emperor. "Why would I want to do that?" he asked calmly. Palpatine seemed genuinely surprised and irritated at his response. Luke slowly began to approach the Emperor, as Vader turned to watch but didn't follow. "I'll never give in to the dark side, Your Highness. You may have corrupted my father, but you won't corrupt me or anyone else. I'm here to end this, as a Jedi," Luke said. "So be it, Jedi," Palpatine spat in disgust, and in a blur of speed he whipped both of his hands up out of his cloak, sending blue lightning from his fingertips. The crackling beams of dark energy lanced out towards Luke faster than the eye could track, but they did not harm him. Luke was beyond that now, far beyond that. Holding up one hand in front of his body, palm outward, Luke absorbed Palpatine's attack, opening himself up fully to the Force and allowing the darkness to dissipate. What energy remained passed into him and fueled his own strength, which already eclipsed Palpatine's. The Emperor snarled, increasing his attack, and grew even more frustrated when it still did nothing but pass into Luke's open hand. "You cannot harm me, Sidious," Luke said calmly over the roar of the lightning. Palpatine ceased his barrage and leapt at Luke, producing a red lightsaber from his sleeve. He spun in a blur and landed in front of the Jedi, slashing and striking as fast as he possibly could. To the naked eye, he may have seemed to be a tornado of light, but his crimson blade struck nothing. Luke could see the Emperor as if he was moving at half speed. With both hands clasped behind his back and his eyes closed, Luke easily and nimbly dodged every attack, weaving around, under, and over the Sith Lord's blade. Vader watched as his master failed to land a single blow on his son and marveled at Luke's immense power in the Force. He was undoubtedly the strongest being that Vader had ever encountered. As Palpatine attacked him, Luke could sense his father's presence in the Force and wondered if he would aid him in the fight. He could feel Vader's conflict, but there was still something holding him back. Maybe it was fear. He knew that fear had been Anakin's greatest flaw, but also his greatest motivation. Anakin would have done anything to protect his loved ones. Maybe that was the key to bringing Anakin back, and Luke was willing to bet his life on it if it meant destroying the Sith. Knowing that his father was watching, Luke continued to dodge Palpatine's attacks, but then he allowed himself to misstep, to purposefully position himself where Palpatine's blade was about to be. He was about to be killed, and he knew Vader could see it too. He just hoped that his mother had been right about Anakin. Vader could see what was about to happen. He could sense it in the Force too. Palpatine was about to kill Luke, his son who offered him a place, a family, compassion, love. When was the last time anyone had offered him that? When was the last time he wasn't alone? All those thoughts passed through him in an instant, and then, with a great burst of speed and power he had not known since before his defeat on Mustafar, Anakin Skywalker leapt forward and drove his lightsaber blade straight through the Emperor's back. Palpatine let out a shocked gasp and looked down at the red blade protruding from his chest as Luke let his momentum carry him a few steps away. He had been right. His father just needed a little extra push. In one swift motion, Luke ignited his blue lightsaber and sliced off the Emperor's head, sending it bouncing across the throne room floor. Just then, a large wave of energy burst from where Palpatine's body had been, a storm of dark-side power. Luke watched the storm rise as it exploded outward, and he saw his father was holding both of his hands up as if trying to catch it. "Father?" he asked, unsure what was happening. "Luke," Anakin yelled. "It's his spirit in the Force. He knows the secrets of essence transfer. I must contain his spirit." Anakin reached out with the Force and began to pull the energy into himself, drawing it closer and closer until it went inside his body. "How can you do that?" Luke began to ask, until he realized what was happening. "No, Father, let me do it," he yelled. "No, my son. This is my destiny. Go," Anakin said. Luke couldn't believe what was happening. He had come to save his father, not sacrifice him. But he didn't know what to do. He didn't understand what essence transfer was, but he could guess that it wasn't good, and it meant that Palpatine could come back somehow. He watched as Anakin pulled all of the dark side energy into himself, using all of his power in the Force to contain Palpatine's essence. With tears in his eyes, Luke began to back away towards the door, forcing every step without taking his eyes off his father. Anakin growled with effort, his voice strained and full of pain as he seemed to hold a small orb of energy between his hands. "Go," he yelled, but Luke couldn't bear to leave his father. And then, an explosion of white light filled the room, and Luke instinctively created a protective cocoon of Force energy around himself. The blast rippled around him, and he shut his eyes due to the blinding white light. When he opened them, the throne room was in ruins, and his father was gone. All that remained was parts of Darth Vader's armor in a heap, shattered and smoking on the floor. Anakin's body was gone, and Luke wasn't sure if it was because of the explosion or because he had become one with the Force like Obi-Wan had. As if in answer to his question, he heard an unfamiliar voice in his mind, and he realized it must have been Anakin's voice before he became trapped in his armor. "Luke, I will always be with you. Thank you for saving me," Anakin said.